Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome, everyone, to a very special episode of Recover You. I am very excited today because I have a former client and friend on today's episode to share a transformation story with you, what recovery looks like when you are willing to do the work. So, Katherine, I'm very excited to have you. And just so everybody knows, we have decided to change names to keep anonymity so that she feels very comfortable in sharing her story and speaking authentically and openly today. And so I'm really excited to have you on.
Thank you.
Yes, I have been looking forward to this. We really connected when we started working together from crazy childhood stuff that we experienced, including being raised with IVLP, ATI, fundamental homeschooling materials. And so we had a lot of fun conversations around our experiences with that and getting out of that and being adults and, you know, just all these different things that impact our lives, right? But that was a connecting point. And then I just loved so much every session that we would have. You were such a deep thinker and self-reflector, and you always showed up and you were like, I am ready to do the work. And it didn't really matter how hard it was, which we all know this journey can be very difficult, and it forces us to really face some hard truths in life. And so I was just really thankful that every time you showed up, you're like, all right, what's next? How do we move through this? Let's do it. So I'm really excited to share your story today and welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Yeah. I've been looking forward to this too.
So let's just start. I think everybody is going to be a little curious when we're sharing transformation stories about what the actual betrayal was, right? How did you find out? What were kind of the bullet points of your story that kind of brought you into the recovery journey to begin with?
Yeah, well, even just hearing you say transformation story, I recoil a little bit from it because 2 years in, it's just been the living life work of 2 years, day in, day out. So it doesn't even feel like the word transformation applies. But then looking back to where we've come from is really, really incredible. So I guess we can say transformation in that sense. But my first initial reaction to that word was, oh, that doesn't apply. And then it's like, oh yeah, I guess it does. But the main points in terms of bare bones, what we went through, it was April, or really it started in February 2022. And it started with a conversation that came to me out of nowhere, out of the blue, with my husband sharing that he had some attraction issues in our relationship, and that sometimes it's, hard to stay motivated with, I have always considered myself to have a higher libido than him, and I thought that was just the normal way things were. One of those countercultural things where we're told women don't have a higher libido usually than men, but I did. Mm-hmm. And I always have. So that was an interesting start to kind of a slow drip of disclosure and information over the next March, April, May, June, 4 months, until, a lot of hurtful conversations, a lot of, trying to figure out, well, what am I supposed to do with this information? I didn't sign up for, even at that point, before knowing anything else. I didn't sign up for a partner that struggles with attraction to me, to begin with. And over the next few months, there was this then admittance that there was a struggling of attraction to minors and teenagers, to be specific. And so that was thrown into the mix, another whirlwind moment. And then it was June of 2022 that it was more started by me. I came home and I said, I'm just feeling really bad. I don't know what to do. I feel like I have 1 foot in, 1 foot out right now. I hate feeling that way. in our marriage. I'm still wrestling with all this information. And he, in that moment, had the courage to come forward and say, well, I didn't want to admit all of the things, but I just wanted to admit that, I have had an affair. And that's when everything really plummeted. I mean, I remember that moment so clearly, sitting on the floor with him in the living room, and just spiraling into this, like, I don't know what my life is. Everything I know is a lie, and just going completely numb. And so over the course of that month, being in survival mode, being completely frozen, figuring out through just prying him and not even really knowing what questions to ask, wishing later I'd asked way more questions than I did, that there had been, I don't even want to call them affairs, but there had been infidelities. And then through this course of action, trying to get him in with a therapist and see what could be done in that conversation. And then him coming home one day and saying, she really thinks that there's a sex addiction here. And having that label then brought into the conversation.
Yeah.
And then starting the process of undigging, things that seemed to him at the time perfectly normal in his journey, but really was this problem with intimacy, problem with attaching securely to humans that he was in relationship with, never really wanting a relationship, having rampant sex in college and throughout, and then ultimately having infidelities come up while he was with me. Starting 3 months into our dating relationship, he went to a friend's wedding and ended up kissing a girl there. I never knew about that. So that was so him just realizing that, oh, this is something that I cannot stop. And this is a problem, and I'll take care of it next time, and I won't do this again. I'll get it. I'll figure it out. And it just never, never being able to do it on his own, to the point where it all came out. But I am so thankful in this process now. I can say I'm thankful that he's the one that came forward with this information, instead of catching him in betrayal, which I know both situations would have felt really the same, but now on the backside of it, I'm just really thankful for that little piece of the story, that it was his courage that brought him forward into the light in the end.
Yeah, it makes a big difference for sure. And I know just how incredibly painful all of that information was and is, for you. I think when we look back, sometimes we get distance and we get healing from it, but it's, it was a time in life that was just excruciatingly painful, learning all of those things and trying to figure out, like, who the heck am I married to? Right. And feel free to answer this in any way that you feel comfortable with. One thing that you mentioned that I think a lot of people are immediately going to have like a question about is the attraction to younger, to minors, right? And so to clarify for everyone, was there ever any illegal activity or abuse that was engaged in?
No. It was, the part of the addiction, of course, is the porn component, and TikTok porn, we call it, with dancing women and things like that. And so there would be, videos of probably teenagers or minors dancing on social media. That was part of the, video compilations or the addiction that he just couldn't stop watching. But there was no, downloading of any kind of illegal, porn materials or anything like that. So
thanks for answering that, because I think a lot of people are going to hear that terminology and immediately go, wait, like, was there something illegal that happened? And there's obviously, as you probably had 10 million questions, other people are going to feel super anxious about that as well. And so this was part of just like a conglomeration of a larger issue. And probably the piece that he felt most shame about knowing that it was wrong. And so he kind of expressed that to you.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of interesting talking to you now and I won't even say the other side of this, but like a different perspective than in those moments. Like even just recounting all those things, I feel that pressure in my chest again, and that like heaviness start to come back in of like even talking about the details. But on in the other side of things, realizing now what I know, him being brave enough to share that piece of the struggle was really, really important, because it gave me almost an awareness of not that I put aside my own needs, but really for the first 2 to 3 months, it was almost a frantic, like, this is more serious than just against me. Because I come from a background of, a history of some molestation in my family. I have some, awful extended step grandparents and things like that who took advantage of, myself, my sibling in this way. And so there's already a history in our family. And so it was really that maybe was the first piece of information that really stuck. Rather than the pain of the infidelity and breaking of vows in our marriage.
Sure.
And I think, I have a worldview that everything happens for a reason. And so in that situation, it was almost better that I could focus on that piece of the addiction to start with, as a way to help figure out resources for him, help him, now I look back and I think to myself, like, wow, that was so generous, as a betrayed partner to like take on this burden in a way that was more helpful than like vindictive or spiteful or just fuck you, I'm leaving. And I would not fault anyone for doing any of those things at all. Like in like a part of me sometimes wishes that I could have been more angry right away, more vindictive right away. But as it worked out and in the end, having stayed together, spoilers, then I am grateful that I had kind of had that to pay attention to and hold on to for a while, of like, oh, this guy is going to ruin his entire life. It's not that he's just set on ruining mine, because in the escalation of addiction, that's a very scary thing, hearing about attraction to minors. So
yeah. And I think the fact that you are willing to do this podcast, it speaks to the level of healing that you have both engaged in. And I know, just even sharing a little bit of your personal background, I know how difficult it is when you start to tell people that story, right? When you start to tell, hey, this is what happened to me in my life, or this is my husband's story, or this is our story. And the first couple times you do that, or the first 100 times you do that, it's really scary. But it takes such a significant amount of healing to even be willing to open that door with the idea of maybe somebody can relate to this. Maybe somebody else is in the exact same situation as I am, and they're feeling so alone, and like nobody in the world is going to understand them. And maybe hearing what you heard originally, maybe you even felt like, is there even hope for this? Like, can somebody recover from this? Can a spouse recover from this? Can an addict recover from this? Like, can we actually live healthy lives? I think those are very normal questions that people in these scenarios ask. And I think it takes people going through the journey and being willing to talk about it out loud that then helps other people in that moment say, oh, I see somebody that has worked through this. I see somebody that's progressing. I see somebody that's 10 steps ahead of me in this. And like you were saying, I think, the recovery journey, I feel like is almost lifelong, right? Like things are always going to come up, and it's a constant thing of self-reflection and personal growth on both sides, right? And so it's not that we've arrived per se, but just the journey you've been on to get to this place has been very admirable.
Thanks. You're a big part of that. But I also think that just as human beings, we really, really like to draw lines it's easier for us. It makes life simpler. And so, people, even I think in betrayal, it's easy to draw that line and be like, okay, a spouse is allowed to have a sex addiction and have a porn addiction and have infidelity, hurtful enough. But no one is allowed to struggle with a situation like, it's not even the label pedophile, because it's a certain age limit. It's like post-pubescent minors. Not that it matters in the end, but there's a line drawn, right? And so for several months, I was in this kind of state of, did I not only marry a cheater, did I marry a monster? Did I marry a psychopath? Having this, the desire to draw that line and say, well, you could have an issue. Anyone can have an issue. Gambling, smoking, alcohol, sex, that's fine. But this particular area is off limits for a human being to struggle with, unless you're absolutely broken beyond repair, right? And I think that's a very normal kind of direction to take, without seeing human beings in general as a whole, and seeing that this struggle, the attraction that was there with minors was part of the same exact struggle that led him to be unfaithful in our marriage, with wanting validation from a certain body type, having come to that validation at a very young age, being exposed to porn at 8 years old, being emotionally neglected by his parents in so many different ways, being an only child, no support to lean on. And by 12 years old, 13 years old, already objectifying girls in his classroom and not wanting to be in a relationship with any of them. And so there's and then you think of the addiction being so emotionally stunting. And of course I'm coming, now I realize, I hear myself talking, I'm like coming from all of the healing that has happened and understanding of him in this process doesn't necessarily, is not necessarily comforting to maybe hear that from a betrayed spouse if you're just starting this journey, because there's no way in hell I want to support this person that hurt me so bad. But now there's such an understanding about it that I can't separate these issues and compartmentalize these issues into different, like, bad versus less bad categories. They're all the same issue of pain and brokenness that he had to get through and to heal.
That is such a difficult reality, I think, for some people to kind of, what you're talking about, kind of understand and accept. Because I think there's a real desire for humans to believe I'm not capable of X, Y, Z. And the reality is, I think every human is capable of every evil. And I think that's a really, really difficult thing to come to. And to do exactly what you're talking about, which is understanding, and it never excuses, right? We're never excusing abuse. We're never excusing infidelity. We're never excusing the outcome of it ever. And it's combined with the understanding, which is what you're talking about, of where it comes from. And being able to have the compassion that says, if the person is willing, which he absolutely was, if the person is willing, this is something, we can have compassion, and this is something that can be healed. Right. And so that is such a difficult thing and takes such strength, I think, for a partner to be willing to learn what you learned and to sit with that and to process that. And also, to be clear, you were doing all of this at the same time that you, I think, set pretty good boundaries for yourself. This was not a, hey, let me help you get into recovery, but we're acting like a happily married couple every day, all day while we're going through this, right? So just to be clear for everyone, she's expressing like this deep, incredible compassion, empathy, which she absolutely has. And she balanced that over time with a lot of boundaries and self-care and healing and all these different things. So maybe we can kind of shift a little bit into that. So
yeah. Going back to the beginning, in terms of boundaries, for instance, I definitely had none of this perspective at the time. And if anything, I didn't have any sort of perspective of it at the time, other than let's get through this day and see what happens at the end of it. And I think that that's just really important. If I were listening, if I were at the beginning of this journey and listening in to a podcast like this, I would want to know that you don't have to have all the answers right away.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you don't have to have a timeline for having the answers. You don't have to think, oh, in 3 months, I better have all the answers, or in 6 months, I better have all the answers, or a year from now, I got to know exactly what's going to happen and have the certainty. Like, that is so much pressure. And, that first night, because he came forward with all of this information of infidelity, that first night in June. And that night, I slept beside him in bed, and I didn't sleep almost a wink, right? And just lay awake. But I allowed myself to be in a situation of closeness with him that night. And that is one piece of it that I really think back on. And I think, that was the start of realizing that I don't have the boundaries that I need in my relationship, actually. Because afterwards, 2 days later, we separated for 3 to 4 weeks, because I couldn't be near him any longer. But that took a little while to settle in from the first initial information. It wasn't like an immediate, like, get away from me, I don't want you to touch me.
Well, you went from living in a reality that you thought you had to trying to absolute shock and trying to figure out what reality actually was. And I think it's normal sometimes for that to take a couple of days to really sink in, and it's like, whoa, what is this true? And if it is, what has my life been? Right.
Right. And what caused me to go into a separation was, we had a social hang the day after, he told me, with friends. And I also went through that because I thought, somewhere in my brain, my numb brain, I was like, well, we can't cancel because then everyone will know something's up and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And of course it would have been fine if I had been like, I am not about to sit through a social hang with our friends. No one knows what's going on, and pretend like everything's okay. And that's essentially what happened. And I felt, of course, completely awful afterwards.
It's like imposter syndrome at that point, right? Because you're showing up as a couple that they think you are while you're still trying to figure out what just happened, and you're like, this just feels weird.
It was just a disaster emotionally, and I'm not really good actually at hiding feelings on my face, and so the couple of my friends absolutely knew something was up and was just like, whoa, this is really weird. What's going on? Yeah. But afterwards, the next morning, I watched a video from Esther Perel, as we all know, is a relationship coach. And it was talking about infidelity and how there is hope for relationship where there's full accountability and safety. And at that point was when it finally sunk in. And I was like, I need to get away. I need to leave. He has some serious issues, and my life is completely over as I know it. So I need to go away and be out of this house, Yeah. So that was the first start of really processing the information.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's a really, really common thing that you'll hear from betrayed spouses as well. There's a perception in my church, in my community, in my friend circles, whoever it is that you're around on a regular basis, right? Or they know my spouse, or they view us a certain way, or we're committed to XYZ, or we have this on the calendar, right? And I so much view this type of thing as cancer of the marriage. And you just drop everything, right? You as if you have to treat it, and it's a life or death situation. And so I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think it's a really, really, really common thing that people sort of push through, and internally they're like, I remember I went to a church event it's like I think it was a wedding shower. I don't know how many months this was into it,
Oh,
right?
no.
Yeah, a wedding. So, but they asked me, they're like, hey, can you, we give the questions to your husband, he answers them, and then we quiz you on them at the shower. And I was like, okay, whatever. So I go, right? And I'm like, I might still divorce
How long was
this person.
after?
I don't know, a couple months maybe, like into it.
Okay.
Like definitely year one.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I might divorce this person. I was not in a lovey-dovey headspace, right? And I'm up there answering questions to see if I match Patrick's answers.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's like,
So
should I
awkward.
have just said no? You know what I mean? And so I wanted to just blanket statement, like give everyone permission to do that. And then to your other point too, with like the timeline, it's another really, really common thing. Every betrayed partner on day one wants to know the date that they will be healed. They want, right? How, if I'm going to do this with or without him, tell me that I'm going to feel better in 3 months. Promise me that if I do these 5 steps, I will feel better in a year, And
I think we had a similar conversation like that in our first coaching. So when can I expect to be healed?
Hey, yeah, tell me. Well, if I had a magic wand, I would tell everybody tomorrow. But the reality is that every relationship is a little bit different. A lot of it depends on the betrayer, right? Like what level of safety they provide for you. But then a lot of it also depends on how much we engage in the healing process and how willing we are to face it. And there's just so many things that play into it, right? And so the average is 1 to 3 years. And so when people are getting a little impatient at like month 4, month 5, month 6, month 9 even, you're like, oh my gosh, like you're so early in the process. That's what I tell people so frequently. Yeah. You're so early in the process. It's okay. It's okay to feel triggered. It's normal at this phase. And the thing is, like, I think maybe we were talking about this maybe before we started recording. If I'm repeating myself, I apologize, but it's about the trajectory, right? It's about, do you see them? Are things progressing as you go through this process? So that's one of the things you really look for as a green flag, is that we're not staying stuck in the same place too long. And if one of us brings something up that's not working, we move to the next phase and we keep working on it.
Well, I've always hated this answer that time helps, because with grief, time is weird. You can go through a whole long time of healing and then still feel grief and pain and anger about an event. Like, we all know that. We remember things in 30 years ago that happened, and we feel like we're back there. Mm-hmm. But also, I hate it, but it's so true that time does make a difference, day by day, moment by moment. Like, I always say there are thousands of moments that could have led to a divorce in our healing journey. Thousands of moments that were, instead of turning away and letting things just simmer or explode, we turned toward each other instead. Both of us independently choosing to let go of ego or to put aside the pain just to see if we could carry this conversation out a little bit longer and see where it takes us. Like so many moments of that where it would have been so easy for it to lead to separation, for it to lead to more distance, for it to lead to less communication, less physical touch,
Well, one of the things that really impressed me about both of you was the mutual willingness to have very open, honest conversations. And I really feel like for couples that survive, couples that are able to have a healthy relationship and move through reconciliation, that is like one of the cornerstones of that, is that they're able and willing to have really vulnerable conversations through the healing process and show up in a way that is emotionally supportive of each other. And that's not disregarding the reality that there will be some fights in there. You're going to be triggered in there sometimes. You're going to be angry sometimes. You're going to be sad sometimes. But the general willingness to say, like, we're both here. We want to be on the same page. And your spouse was really willing to show up and listen. And I saw that a lot through the process, that he was really willing to have these really emotionally in-depth conversations about hard things. And I think that played a huge, huge role in what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's, you say sometimes you're triggered, sometimes you're in pain, sometimes you're angry. I would say way more than sometimes. Most of the time in the beginning, you're triggered and angry and in pain. I don't remember a single day that I didn't cry for the first maybe 6 months, in some way of, or, feel that uprising of just like anger and hurt and rage. But you're right. There's this element of, I think you and I both know that in betrayed or in the partner that did the betrayal, there's such a shame spiral that happens. And that is perfectly normal to have a shame spiral about. In fact, it's healthy for them to feel the shame of what they did to a certain point. But if that shame spiral stops them from actually having these conversations and hearing your pain, because you have to be able to talk about it and they have to be able to remind you that they haven't forgotten what they did. I don't care how recent the information is. I don't care, maybe you're in a long-term relationship and they betrayed you 5 years ago and it's finally coming forward, but they haven't done anything in 5 years. They still better be the one for the next few months as they're working through it to bring up the fact that they betrayed you, because it cannot just be you thinking about it 24/7, because it does feel like that, right? It's the only thing you think about for a really long time.
Yeah.
And so his shame spiral, thankfully, didn't prevent him. There were times that it did, but he was willing to always come back, after wallowing in his own misery and feelings of victimhood and feelings of like, I've ruined your life. I don't know how I could ever even do anything to make it up and things like that, which I agreed with all of that at the beginning. It's like, yeah, you damn well ruined all of my life. But he was always willing to come back and then restart the conversation and push further. Like, tell me, keep telling me, like, what was this like for you? What did this mean to you? And, I would say, Kylene, you and I started working together. We started working together a year into my own recovery, a year after the information came out, which to me feels really crazy. Like looking back at that and the process that we took together, and then looking back at that first year of just survival, it felt like I definitely should have had support in my corner for that time.
Oh yeah, definitely. But people don't know that it exists, right?
Yeah.
Like that's part of it, I think.
Yeah.
You're going through this thing and you feel totally alone, much less, who can help me through it. You're like, is anybody going to be able to see me and accept me and love me? And you're kind of worried about exactly the word you use, survival, right? And so I think that's unfortunately more common than not, that a lot of people find themselves navigating it more or less alone. And we want to change that. We want to keep doing what we're doing with you sharing your story and saying, hey, like there are people out there that can help you through this and help guide you. So what did you do that first year? Because I know you guys had done a lot of work. You had really kind of tried to get some healing in before we connected.
Well, it was a God thing. We had a friend of mine had said, you are in really bad shape. Go to this acupuncturist for some let him help with your body, let him, at least like relieve some of this tension. And she paid for me to go to this acupuncturist. Aww, this acupuncturist just so happened to be a participant of this coaching program for men. Wow. And in breaking down on his table, I would not recommend this because I hardly knew the guy, but I just, as it is, he was very empathetic. He was very, he asked a lot of like self-reflective questions, and it just came out that I was really, really struggling. And my husband, has this issue. That's what I called it. I think I even used the word addiction. I don't remember, but he's the one who recommended us the men's coaching program. And so at that point, he was willing to pretty much do anything because he was very, very nervous and afraid that I would just at any point decide to walk away, right? I think that's very common too, is they're trying to figure out their own shit and then also feeling like, I'm going to lose my partner because I ruined everything, which, you know, a lot of people do end up losing their partners because of their actions. And that's very fair. I could have walked away at any point and been completely justified. And maybe in another circumstance I would have, right? But just the way that it worked out, I didn't. So he ended up going to a men's coaching program that was phenomenal, that really was the saving grace for our marriage, in the sense that it woke him up to his lying tendencies. It woke him up to with the ways that he hides from discomfort, the ways that he seeks validation outside of himself.
Wow.
And he had some really transformative, we call it woo-woo, very woo-woo experiences there. You know, they were doing cold plunges. They were, nice. they were doing a meditation where they were projecting into the future, following the path of their struggle and addiction and loneliness to the very end of their life.
Whoa.
Where are you? Who's around you? There's no one around your bed because you have turned away everyone who ever loved you. There was a lot of just very intense emotional work that they did in that first weekend that gave me this little spark of hope. And until then, this was a month and 2 weeks after all of the information came out that I said, go. I don't care what it is. I don't care if they're good or not. Let's just try this. I don't know. We're just kind of floundering. And he went and came back, and I remember a text that he sent after the cold plunge night, where for the first time he didn't believe this. This sounds so funny to me now after everything we've gone through, but he didn't believe that he could last through the ice. Because he had never been a guy that allowed himself to be uncomfortable. And
that's such a hallmark of addictive tendencies, right? Like, I don't know how to be uncomfortable for long periods of time, which is why it ends up with self-medicating in all of the different ways, right? Yeah, so that makes total sense. Yeah,
to turn away.
So
from
he probably felt he was like, "Oh my gosh, I did it."
It was transformative for him because he also saw this much more burlier, macho dude go through the ice before him, and thought. And that guy didn't last. And so he thought, well, if this guy didn't last, I'm definitely not going to last. And he fucking did it. Yay! He got through the cold plunge. And that night I got a text that said, I can do anything. I can beat this. I'm not alone. I've chosen you as my partner. I want to do anything possible to win back this relationship and your trust. Okay, now I'm going to start crying. And that was the spark. That was the initiative, the decision from him that I needed to give me this hope that, like, he could do the work that was needed. And so he went into this coaching program for a year with this men's group and had a lot of support. Thank goodness. He had weekly meetings. It was essentially plus an SA group that he had started going to in town. So he really jumped in right away, and that allowed me to just kind of hang on and survive. I didn't have my own support. I had like Instagram therapy, you know, I had accounts that I started following. I think you were one of them during that time. I don't remember, 3 to 4 months after I found you, because there's not a lot of information or accounts out there about sexual betrayal. And I just hung on, and I just watched and waited and, you know, fake smiled my way through some interactions and pushed through, to a point where it felt like he was taking over, and I just sit back and let that happen.
Wow. I'm so glad he had that experience. You mentioned, like, that text really speaks into the importance of the mentality of going through recovery for the betrayer, which is they have to believe they can do it.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that makes all the difference. If somebody is mentally stuck in their addiction, they will stay there. If they believe that they can be someone else and that they can truly live in as a recovered human, they can also do that. But they have to know that that's possible, and sometimes that's why they say the opposite of addiction is community. That sometimes it takes other people saying, you can do this. Let me show you, you can do this. Let me put you in a scenario where you can prove to yourself that you can do hard things, and then you prove to yourself that like hard things are possible. And I'm just going to be in this group supporting you and telling you like, you can accomplish what you want to accomplish. You just have to believe that you are a human being that's capable of being someone that lives in recovery. Like you can choose that identity, And so that's huge. And that's awesome that he was able to connect with that so quickly. I know I'm sure that made all the difference for you guys that first year. It sounds like had that not happened, things might have gone very differently for you.
Well, and I came away from that with, of course, a very skeptical, we'll see, it meant a lot to me to get that text, but when it gave me that little spark of hope, but it didn't lessen any of the pain or confusion
right.
for those few months, after that, but it did. Yeah, it did help me hold on and not just run away.
What do you think made you decide to start working on like betrayal recovery and reach out to me and actually do work on that side of things?
It was mainly the triggers that were so bad. I mean, I don't know if I can't imagine it being different for anyone. But I can only speak from my personal experience, but I've always already had an overactive imagination, and I never went into a situation where I objectified the bodies around me. Even as a single person, I was never someone to walk into a room and be like, "Ooh, I've picked out the two cute people in the room. I'm going to focus on them." I've never been that way, but after betrayal, that was my whole life, was walking into public situations and living through his eyes is what I call it, is picking out the bodies that would be issues, picking out the comparisons to me and what, he quote unquote really wants secretly. Right. And that was so hard. It still is hard. We have varying success now in really big, crowded summertime social situations, I would call it, where there are lots of different outfits and, or the beach wear or whatever. I still tend to freeze up in certain ways. And I know that that's going to get better over time. And I can only say that because I've seen it from where I came from, but despite all of the work that he was putting in and all of the things that he was saying, there was still this filter on every time he gave me an affirmation or every time he said, "You are what I want," where I would then, in my, almost like the same way that an addict would, start to obsess over all of the bodies that he really could be with instead of me. And I think for me personally, the first initial conversation we had, which was the attraction conversation, stuck and really took hold, because that was the perfect marrying of both of our traumas. I've always struggled with that self-image, weight obsessed family, and that mentality that I just need to be smaller to be more worthy. And so that initial attraction conversation was, first of all, the first piece of information I had. So it was kind of the first like bomb that went off and the thing that made the most impact. And then throughout betrayal, in the end, at first, it almost didn't matter that he had affairs. It was really the fact that he was unsatisfied with me as a partner and that it was my fault. Because in the beginning of these conversations, and yes, you can absolutely call him an asshole for this. He said things that, of course, now he majorly regrets, but while he was trying to kind of protect himself from being discovered, he said things like, everything is perfect except for the fact that you don't look like this. And if you just looked like this, everything would be fine. And so when you hear a partner say that, you can't help but internalize it, especially if you already have those kinds of deep rooted, self-image, body dysmorphia issues to begin with. So that's been the hardest part is working through that sense of looking at myself in the mirror, knowing that I'm okay, knowing that it doesn't matter what I look like I'm worthy of love. All the things that we know we have to feel and work on. But
I think I even remember, was there like a homework piece? I think it had something to do with wearing an outfit you feel really like pretty in and like going out in public. Cause I think we did something like that, right? And that was like, yeah. So it's such a normal thing. I think after this, it's like, I remember it was like, I would feel pretty in front of the mirror and then I'd feel stupid when I walked away from it.
Yeah.
So it's like, you'd have to like get the visual, like it's really, I am okay. I'm put together. I like my outfit, whatever. But then it's like, if you're in the real world, you have trauma brain and you are just, it's like imposter syndrome with all of those thoughts that you just described. Right. And it's a really scary thing.
And the comparison factor, especially someone is always going to look more put together, more culturally, desired, more, wealthy, more, pretty, whatever. There's always going to be someone that you can look at and say, I'm not like this person, therefore I'm lesser than in some way. And so those issues just were so compounded. And then add into that the objectifying that I started doing of bodies around me because I was essentially trying to control his addiction, walk in and decide these are the people that he's going to have an issue with.
It's threat assessment, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're walking it. But I think that's also very, very common. And I think that's one of those reasons that betrayal is a trauma, because think about what that's doing to your brain. You went from walking into the world, not only feeling confident in yourself, but then also humanizing other people. And for a period of time, you shifted into somebody that felt very self-aware, and then objectifying people, not intentionally like, I'm sexually objectifying them, but what you're saying is like, I'm scanning for what might be a potential sexual threat, right? And that is the brain 100% trying to keep us safe. That's what it does. And that's one of those ways that it's like, okay, I get what you're doing, but can you calm down a little bit? I guess it's like, but that you think about that particular patterning of trying to find safety, that can turn into kind of a traumatic to ourselves. It's like a trauma to ourselves as we go through recovery.
It was a mess too, because early on when he had started working with a therapist and really starting to dig into like connecting the dots back in childhood, connecting the dots for why, this sense of objectification had become a source of obsession for him and validation for him. He could be perfectly fine walking into a room, but with me, he is fully in his rituals. He's fully in his focus. He's doing good. He feels good. But then with me, he sees me starting to become activated and triggered. Right. He starts trying as much as possible to prove that he's okay, which then to me translates as, oh, he's trying too hard to be okay. There must be an issue here. And it just became this spiral. Right. And I think that's ultimately what led me to say, and both of us to say, I think maybe he was the first one to say it. Like he said, listen, you've done a really good job of helping me get on the right track to get the resources I need and to start healing. It's your time. It's your turn to have someone in your corner helping you heal instead of just surviving. And that was really, really important, just to know that, like, it was almost a sense of relief. I'm, we're all control freaks, but for me, just being able to release that grip on like, he needs to be doing better. He needs to recover. He needs to not be harmful to anyone. And then to release that and to be like, oh, he's okay. It's my turn to heal. It almost felt like that after 9 to 10 months of that. And so I started looking into options.
Yeah.
And you were really the only, I not like you're the
you didn't
only
choose me
option
because you
out
loved
there,
me. No.
but you were the only consistent
Yeah.
source of information and content in this area.
Mm-hmm.
I would look up hashtags on Instagram to see what other accounts were out there, and there are so few.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
It's growing.
and
It's thankfully growing, but there's just not enough. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had already connected to your personality through social media, you know, as that goes. And I think that I messaged you at one point and just said, "Hey, I'm looking for help." And then you wrote back, and we set up our first call. And it wasn't until that first initial call that we had together where we found out all of the similarities,
Mm-hmm.
the ATI background, the cult mentality background, the purity culture background, you know, the performing background.
I know. We were just like, do I know you from childhood? No. Yeah, we definitely connected on so many things. And I'm so glad we did, because it's just been such a pleasure to know you. So what do you think? You started to get this healing work for yourself, and that showed up in a variety of different ways. And I do remember, as we began to work together, you almost said at one point that it almost felt like you were going backwards, right? And we talked about, do you remember that? And we kind of talked about, the Band-Aid. It's like, okay, there's a situation where you have like a wound on your arm and there's a little bit of dirt in it, and we've put a Band-Aid on it, and you feel comfortable with that right now. But what we're going to do is like rip it off and like clean it out and suture it up and stuff like that. And so it was kind of uncomfortable for a little while. What do you think? First of all, why were you willing to do that? And secondly, because you're so brave through this whole process. But secondly, what do you think was helpful about that process for you? Yeah.
I mean, the analogy of being sort of white knuckling, surviving while he healed is a really good mental image. We were able to take some time, even out of country, which I know is not available to everyone, but to kind of, literally go into hiding, and just the two of us spend time on these issues. And so I remember we had some resources from his therapist, like sensual touch exercises and getting comfortable, with each other and talking through these talking points and things. And they were all helpful to a certain degree. And I forgot to mention, I did have, very briefly, for maybe 3 months, I had found a CSAT therapist based on your suggestion, one of your reels, talking about like what resources to find if you're betrayed, and he helped me kind of hang in there, but he was only helpful to a certain point, and didn't bring us through any of the process that we did together, by the way, which was kind of wild now that I know what I know. But I was willing to start sexual betrayal coaching because I knew that this is not where we needed to be at the end of the story. So he was doing well, I could tell, but there was still this filter on everything you said, as if, okay, this little voice in the back of my head, like, okay, well, but what if he's lying still? Okay, but what if he's just trying to pretend? Okay, but what if? And at the end of the day, I didn't want that filter forever because I knew it wasn't sustainable. Like, that's not a relationship I want to be in, where I have to filter everything my husband tells me. Even if it's inevitably my trigger and I have responsibility for that, that doesn't feel safe. Yeah. That is constant nervous system dysregulation. I don't want to be there. So after his comment of like, it's really your turn to heal, I was sort of ready to try anything, because now we had been in this place for many months where I get triggered. We regulate it somehow, co-regulate together, or come back together, have a conversation about it, and rinse and repeat. Trigger, come back together, talk about it. Trigger, come back together, talk about it. And there wasn't anything more that could happen from this situation except to continuously be triggered. So I knew I needed more tools. Like, I knew I needed some sort of process, some official process, because there was no official process for us. The biggest piece of advice, if you're going through this, is healing is freaking expensive, but it is worth it. Whatever you need to do, get a someone who can help you get into a real process of recovery, some where you have homework, where you have things you can kind of focus on every day, where you have things that you can talk about, someone helping you learn how to communicate the boundaries, learn how to learn more about your brain while it's triggered, and your nervous system while it's triggered, and like what to do about it. Those are the things that I needed, and I had no idea. So when we started, I just realized that there was so much that we were missing out on. You know, you brought us through a disclosure process. You brought us through him writing an impact letter to me, me writing an impact letter, him writing a recovery identity letter.
I remember that being like transformational for you guys. Yeah, that was a big deal.
Because up until that point, we had plenty of conversations about it, but I had never had the support and the permission to communicate all of the ways. And I had plenty of evidence at that point, months and months of evidence, all of the ways that my life and my psyche was different now because of betrayal than it used to be. So that was really important. And then you're the one that, I asked about it and you talked about it. I'd seen some of your reels about a polygraph, and we decided ultimately we wanted to do that and went through that process. And that was a huge, of all of the things that we did, that was one of the most important steps that we took to remove that filter from me. And of course, you always say in your reels, like, you know, it's a green flag if it's a yes from the partner to go through with it, because it's a very brave thing to do. And he was completely willing to go through that process and be put under that situation. And for me to, you know, tell my family about it and tell a couple really close friends about it. And to
pause there for just a second, because how important do you think it was that some people in your life that are close to you know about it? Because I know that's another really, really common fear, that, okay, I'll get a therapist, but I can't tell anyone in my life, right? And that's hard, I think, because yes, as a coach, or if you have a therapist or whoever, like, we're going to be there to support you as much as we possibly can. But it's not the same as having a support system of like a family member or a friend that knows what's happening in your life, someone that's in your circle that, like, again, kind of that imposter syndrome. You go to a party, like, you're going to need at least one person to know, like, the real you to feel supported, right? Like, so do you think that was really helpful for you to get to that place where some people knew about it?
Yes and no. I think in the beginning, I actually overshared based on what I know now. I felt very vindicated in being able to tell a couple people, you know? It felt like I could finally talk about some of the resentments that had built up in my marriage and the struggles that we were going through, and had a reason for them. Okay, well, it's not me, it's him. He's the problem. And I think that was vindicating for me for a while. But I do think that it was so important for me to have not even really family, I would say, but a couple very close friends that I talked to a lot, who could check in and know what was going on, I wouldn't have to mask around them.
Right.
I think that was the biggest thing, is that I had people that I didn't have to pretend with.
Yes.
That everything was fine. And I think that really did help a lot.
Yeah.
In terms of beyond those people, any of the snippets of information that I would just would spew out of my mouth sometimes, you know, now I'm like, okay, I definitely didn't need to tell this person. But
we want to find the safe people, right? We want to have our little core. Yeah, exactly.
But, you know, not in a way that was harmful to us, but just an oversharing kind of mentality where I was sort of in the situation of like, I don't give a fuck. I'm not trying to protect him. If I need support, I'm going to get support. If I need someone to emotionally validate me, I'm going to get it. Yeah. And I just sort of sought that out, in probably more ways than maybe some people would. But
Yeah, I think sometimes there's like a spectrum, right? And sometimes people swing from one extreme to the other, where it's like, okay, I'm gonna post on Facebook that my husband cheated on me, or I'm not gonna tell anybody at all. Maybe an in between, find a safe person.
And I would say I would say of all the people, not all the people, I'm exaggerating. Of the people that know that we are struggling, there are, or who knew that there was at least infidelity. There are, 6 or 7 probably out there. Of those people that know there's addiction, maybe 4 or 5. Of those people that know there's addiction, 2 know the whole story.
Yeah. And you probably feel very safe with those people most of the time, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Because there's something to being able to like walk into a room and it's like people know who you are and they accept you anyway. Even on the betrayed side, where it's like, I didn't really do anything wrong, but the fact that they know what you've gone through and they're there, right? That I think it means a lot when we have those people. At least one. Yeah. When we can.
But I will say that it doesn't necessarily make you feel less alone, because again, no one until you and I started chatting, no one really knew what it felt like.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of empathy. There's a lot of like concerned questions. There's a lot of love. Like there's, permission to cry on shoulders and things like that. No one could really know what it felt like to go through that. And so that was really hard. Just to realize that, at the end of the day, people are just going to go back home to their own little lives and not really think about the level of pain that I'm in every single day. And so and I think another hard thing too, is that for the first couple months that my husband didn't have support of his own, it was even more of a burden, because very often in these circumstances, the betrayer doesn't have close friends, I think, even if they maybe have a group of people they hang out with. At least in our case, I was the only person that he could turn to for sharing his healing journey, for sharing more information as he wanted to come clean with his conscience, for trying to get emotional validation because he's hurting in his own way, but like I'm not able to give him that, Right. So that was really tough, being the only person that my partner could lean on for a couple months, until he then again had just more support.
Yeah. So important. Yeah, absolutely. Because at some point, like, that's not your job. Yeah. Immediately when you're creating like immediate stability, like, let's get you into counseling, let's get you into a group, let's do this, let's do that, right? Like, you're the person, but you do as soon as possible that they can get connected to some sort of resource there, that they can have like a support group or people in their lives. That's going to be so helpful for that exact reason, because it doesn't need to be another emotional burden while you're dealing with all of these other things. Like, you have a lot on your plate. As soon as this comes out, let's focus on that, and they can focus on their own healing and communicating it with you, of course, but not having you be like the sole person responsible for like, hey, I'm just going to check these 20 things with you today. You know what I mean? So yeah, absolutely. So couple questions for you as we kind of wrap this up. First of all, just thank you again for being willing to share this story. You mentioned at the beginning, the reality of, you're happily married one day and the next you go, am I married to a monster? And this journey has been very hard. So at this point, it's sort of a 2-part question. Has going through the hard been worth it for you? And how do you view him now?
Those are really good questions. I have this quote that I saw that has stuck with me, and it's about, let me find it for a second. I wrote it down. The good that comes out of a painful situation, it's okay if that good is never worth the pain of what was lost. And And this actually came from an account that I follow who went through miscarriage. And she was just talking about grief in general. Sometimes when people, sometimes it stings when people say, oh, but look at all these blessings on the other side. Oh, look, you now have a baby. And in my case, it just resonated so much because I was like, even if we stay together at that point, I didn't know, right? You're not sure. Even if we end up with the most perfect, ideal relationship I could imagine, and I didn't even have hope for that at that point, it is not worth the grief and misery and pain and rejection that I felt and went through. And if I could choose to do it over again, maybe this is like a hot take, but if I could choose to do it over again, I probably wouldn't, to be perfectly honest.
Heck no. No.
Just for what's on the other side. And so I think the biggest journey for me, in fact, this year 2, we're at the end of we just hit year 2. So at the end of year 2, this year has been about acceptance, like the validity of the past, what he did to me, the dynamic that I attributed to, with no boundaries, with lack of self-esteem, all of that. None of that is going to justify. It's not going to invalidate or justify the present moment, the relationship that we have now. And the present moment, where now I'm in a current healthy relationship, the most healthy relationship I've ever had, to be honest, where I have a partner that is supportive, that is respectful, that is conscientious, that cares so deeply for me, that I feel love from and affirmation from every single day. That doesn't invalidate or justify the past. So both of these realities can exist. What happened and what is now. And that was my goal for this last year, was to come to a place of nuance and acceptance with both of those things. And I think that when you ask, like, how do you feel about him now? Where at one point I asked, like, is this guy a monster? One of the most impactful things in that conversation that happened is that at some point he, in a very memorable conversation, said, almost like a very firm boundary that I've ever heard from him say, this is a deal breaker for me. If you still believe, I'm not saying now, it has to be now, but if you cannot fully believe that I am a good person, that I'm not a monster, if you can't get to that place, then this isn't the relationship for me. And hearing him say that was really impactful, because as a betrayer, that was like, first of all, the initial reaction is like, well, you don't have any right to say that. But it's true. It's not fair for either of us. Why would I be in a relationship where I have this sneaky suspicion that my husband is a monster? Like, that's not going to be good. So there had to be a way to reconcile. It's not worth the pain that I went through, but what we have now is definitely worth staying for and building into and creating a future with.
I like the way you worded that. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think anyone that gets to the other side would never wish the process on anyone, but we would wish the result of the process. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just told a friend actually this the other day, based on some conversations we've had, based on the intimacy that we have. Like, we've some amazing sex now, which I never would have guessed would happen.
Yeah. And I know that was not always reality. That was a difficult road for you.
And it very difficult from the very beginning of our relationship. In fact, that was the one area where I just kept on butting my head against, like, why doesn't this work as well as I think it should? And that is just like flourishing in ways that I never thought possible.
Good.
So I was talking to a friend and saying, if you had not known anything about our situation, and I told you, hey, I just met this guy and we just had this amazing sex, and we had this moment afterwards where we just connected and looked into each other's eyes, and he said these like amazing things to me, and like soul affirming things that made me feel so loved and cherished. you would say, oh my God, this guy is a keeper. He's a unicorn. Like, keep this guy around. Like, who is this? Where did you find him? Yeah. And that's kind of crazy to know, kind of like see objectively, step back and say, this is my reality now. And yet there's this tiny little insignificant detail that we just went through.
Yes, tiny detail. Yeah, exactly. Right. How'd we get here? As you're talking, I'm thinking back to what you said at the beginning, how transformation feels weird because you're still on the journey. Maybe a better word for it would be a redemptive story, because thinking about where it started and where you are and the words that you just used and the depth with which you guys have been able to communicate and connect with each other in a healthy way after all of that pain. And not overlooking anything, not denying reality, but literally being willing to like turn over every stone in this process and talk it out and process it and heal through it every step of the way without going, oh, well, this piece doesn't matter. I mean, you would come and you would bring things and you'd be like, well, now we're dealing with this. And okay, we had a conversation. Now we're dealing with this. And
and how do I tell him this, Kylene? How do I tell him this?
I know. Yeah. We would talk about that.
I would say things in my coaching. Well, Kylene, if he only knew blah, 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 blah. And then you'd be like, well, what if you told him that? And then I would just be stumped for a second. Like, oh, wait, I could tell him those things?
You are allowed, yes, to communicate your thoughts. But look what it did, your willingness to do that, because the reality is, on the addiction side, they are so scared to come forward because they think that everyone's going to hate them and, that they probably think they're a monster, right? And all of these different things. And then on the betrayed side, we sometimes will see betrayed partners really struggle with communicating, right? There's a shame that we can even take on when it's not our shame to bear. And so that can really hinder certain levels of communication. And so this whole process is like seeing what truth and healing is and what it can be and holding that standard, and then being willing to do the hard things that bring you closer to that goal. And sometimes that is like having really hard conversations or, doing different exercises together that are uncomfortable, but that you're safe and ready to do. Right. And so kind of navigating that process. Was there anything, like, if you had to name, like, you kind of mentioned this with like the impact letter, that was pretty big for you guys. Was there anything along your healing journey that you think was a really helpful step in your journey, or a tool or a practice that you guys ended up doing, or anything like that?
The visualizations that we did, which were essentially internal family systems, like parts work, right? Like going inside, talking to, how old is this part? What is it? What is it feeling right now? And then like just sitting with a visualization of, I think one of the most helpful I can remember is that, you had me gift my little inner child. I think she was 5 or 6, like a gift to tell her that she's not alone. She'll never be alone again. That she's always going to be protected, that she's always going to be played with. And I gave her a little horse, because horses meant a lot to me back as a kid. And it's such a simple thing, because at the end of these visualizations, the timeline, going back through your timeline, rewriting the story in your subconscious. It's just, yeah, sure. You can sit there and say, okay, I'm literally just talking to myself right now. Why does this work? This is bullshit. You literally could, right?
I think I even did that like the first time I did an exercise like that or someone did like inner child work with me or something. I was like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
How does this work?
You're sitting there and just with your own emotions and your own thoughts, and it feels silly if you look at it from the outside, but it is so impactful. And then every time that you brought me back to a scene, like a traumatic scene, and then had me empty the bucket, look at if all the emotions still there, or are they less now? Are they gone? And then realizing that there were none of the same painful emotions that were attached to that memory after we worked through visualization. That was crazy to me. And to come up out of, almost like a meditative stance that we were in to do this visualization, and realizing I physically feel different than before, just because I was sitting here having someone guide me through a conversation in my own head. That's crazy.
I know. I love the way you describe that. It's so true. It's so true. That's all it is.
So those are really, really important. I still do those when needed to like help regulate in a triggered moment.
I love that.
I think one of the most impactful things from your module that one of the videos from your module was all about learning about the subconscious. And before we started this process of visualization, one of the biggest things that you said was the subconscious is your biggest protector. It's your biggest, it's the biggest moral advocate that you have. It's your biggest protector. It's your highest self. And that really helped take away this fear of going in and sitting in this pain, knowing is just a shift in perspective, because the subconscious was the enemy, not because I was afraid of it necessarily, but I was more mad at it. That why did I have to just be so unaware of what was happening? Why did my subconscious shield me from all of these things by creating justifications and gaslighting my own intuition? And it was really more like an anger that it wasn't my ally through this process, that I didn't know sooner because my subconscious shielded me from a lot of the pain that I was feeling in my relationship. And so that helped me so much to just come to this like respect for the subconscious and then to be able to work in it.
Yeah. And before we start recording, I was talking to you about Inside Out too. And so I love that you just talked about parts work and everything, because I just watched that movie with Keegan and it's amazing. And they do such a good job of kind of explaining in an easy way, or maybe explaining is not the right word, demonstrating, creating a picture of what internal family systems really is like, and how your brain works. And this one introduces the idea of how like experiences create beliefs. So, what you were talking about is we would go in and we would process certain beliefs or certain emotions or different things. And so, I love doing that type of work. So I'm so glad it was helpful. And I love that you embrace it enough to continue working through things and utilizing it on your own, and I think that's the really neat thing, kind of what you're talking about, when you become more friends with your subconscious and you realize like it has your best interest at heart. It wants you to heal. It wants you to be healthy. Because I was afraid of that as well. I was like, what's going to happen when I go in there? That just sounds scary, right? Like it's this abyss of what could be, scary.
Trauma.
Trauma, scary thoughts, whatever. But no, it's only going to take you where it wants to heal and where it's ready to heal. And so we just let your brain guide the process. And it can be a really magical experience. So I love that you brought that up. Anything else?
Still working on the physical expression of anger.
Oh,
but we'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah,
every time I would, there are a couple of times where you said, do you want to make a noise or a sound or say anything? You want to curse at this person in your head? And as soon as I would start to make a noise, I'd be like, no. too much.
Yeah. So you can do it in your head though, right? Like you can do it in your head, but it's coming. Yeah. So actually embodying that. Yeah.
Yeah. And you were so patient and then just, gave me all the options. So I didn't ever have to feel like I was going in past what I could do.
Right. Yeah. We only want to do what feels comfortable. Exactly. 100%. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing, your story, your healing journey, your thoughts on this. Is there anything you want to leave if a betrayed partner, or I'm going to throw this in there, I didn't prep you for this, but if there is anything you want to leave if a betrayed partner is listening to this, or an addict or a betrayer listening to this, anything you think that they should know, think about, be encouraged by, anything you would say to them?
Ooh, seeing the process so up close for a betrayer makes me want to say all sorts of things to an addict or a betrayer listening. And the biggest thing is that you have to take proactive initiative in this process. You cannot wait for your partner to bring up the conversations. You cannot wait for your partner to express their triggers. If you see them being uncomfortable, speak out and say something. If you see that they are upset with you and you don't know why, you can bet that it's related to the betrayal and say something. So in the place of a betrayal, over communication, over transparency, over initiative, that is going to be the most helpful thing. And I think that, now my husband really, really gets it. But in the first few months, he could have helped that process so much by just having a fuller context of empathy for the pain that I was in and really taking action in every possible way to help me, deal with the abyss that I was in. And so, and I will say, not everyone is willing to do that. So for the betrayed partner, you can absolutely trust your intuition. I think that that's the biggest thing that was healed. You and I, through our time together, Kylene, is like, I was able to come back to a trust in my intuition, which was necessary, because there's so much distrust of that, in thinking that, you make wrong decisions by marrying someone that could do this. How could you not know it was right here under your nose the whole time? There's so many ways that you can distrust and feel like there's no path back to like being able to make good decisions again and trust that you're in a good relationship. But I will say there's the difference between having a trust in your intuition and not calling out and communicating the things that are happening in your relationship. So you can have a sense of what's going on, and you can say something or not. And so for so long, I didn't really say the things that I was really feeling. Your story, this is inconsistent. Why aren't you following through when you say that you were going to do this thing? Hey, I asked you to text me, this is after betrayal, right? I asked you to text me when you got to this place. You didn't text me, and that's not okay, because that feels really unsafe.
Yeah.
These conversations, for whatever reason, they feel almost over dramatic or not allowed to some personalities like mine. It didn't feel like I was allowed to do that with him, even though he's the one that caused the hurt.
Right.
And so I would say, like, the over communication, the over transparency also applies then to the betrayed spouse. Just take it by the balls and say what is rattling around in your brain at that moment. Hey, I'm really nervous about this meeting that you're going into because there's this woman in it that I know could be an issue. Done.
Yep.
And then let the partner respond. And then you get to, as the betrayed spouse, the intuition part is seeing the response from your partner and being able to take information from that and know how to respond to that, and if it's safe to continue moving forward in relationship with this person.
Boom. Yep. 100%. I mean, and basically what you're just sharing is the betrayed partner has the right to use their voice, and the betrayer needs to express empathy and compassion if you guys are going to have a chance of, like, I think that lays the foundation for the healthy relationship, right? Like,
yes,
it's non-negotiable if you're going to choose reconciliation without denial or without without ignoring certain things. Like, you have to have those pieces. You have to be able to do that.
And the last piece, like the bonus for betrayed spouses, if you have every single right to be angry all of the time and to hate this person's guts and to still work on recovery with them, you have every right to do that. But there will be times where, if you are trusting your intuition, that your intuition is going to ask you for softness in a response towards them in order to help their recovery journey and their healing. And it's not always going to feel fair, because you don't actually have to. You're not required to do that. But if you do, and it's a trusting your intuition to respond in a way that is caring and empathetic instead of spiteful and angry and rageful, there will be time for that. But there will be times where the response changes the dynamic and allows them a further level of healing. And I think that that's where the trusting intuition comes from too, because intuition is not always going to lead you into a hard, rigid place of response.
Yes. I think, that's so much. Sometimes it is like dealing with the trigger and expressing the emotions behind it. And sometimes it's going, is this a situation that actually is more my issue and I need to respond in a different way, right? There's both and there's a time, like exactly what you're saying. There's a time and a place for both to be done. And there's also a time and a place for screaming and yelling and crying and being kind and offering empathy and having hard conversations and all of it.
One of the biggest quotes that we live by was just a phrase uttered by a very wise friend of mine that was, it's now on our vision board. Intuition leads with love. Trauma leads with fear.
Oh, I love that.
Yes. And sometimes love is the rigid boundary and the, hey, that's not okay. You can't do this. You can't continue doing this. Yeah. And sometimes love is, I feel you. I see you. That really must be tough for you, even while you're hurting.
Yep. Absolutely. And that I think is the courage that gets you through to the other side. Yeah. Right there. That's it. I think you just nailed it on the head. So when are you opening your coaching practice? When are you passing it on?
You have to send me a list of your certifications and trainings.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I know I know you're nervous coming into this. I think you did a great job. I think there's so many pieces to your story that are going to connect with people on a variety of different levels. We know that everyone's story is a little bit different, but there's just pieces that everyone can relate to. And I think you hit so many commonalities just right on the head, that all betrayed partners have these fears, have these insecurities, have these triggers. And I just think what's so encouraging about your story is your willingness to keep facing it head on and to do the healing work and to keep moving through it again, while not overstepping your own boundaries and not choosing denial. But you guys are both facing truth. You're both facing each other and you're seeing each other truly for who you are and moving closer together in like the healthiest way that you've ever connected in your relationship. And that's really exciting. So I'm really proud of you. And thank you so much for coming on today.
You're welcome.
Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.